Strong database can inform governance. A strong database can inform what kind of projects should happen in a city and what should be the priorities for the city.
Delhi is hundreds of years old, and parts of Delhi are perhaps even more than a century old.
So Nilesh and I were responsible for, we had the privilege to lead a team that prepared the next master plan for the city of Delhi, which is for the perspective plan period up till the year 2041. So this journey of about 4 years now is what we'll try and cover in 20 minutes. So the mandate for the team was for the plan to be strategic and enabling. And as I said, a little more than 4 years ago, an MOU was signed between Delhi Development Authority, which is the agency responsible for planning in Delhi, with NIUA, National Institute of Urban Affairs, to prepare this master plan. And the mandate was for it to be strategic and enabling, which gave us the opportunity to actually redefine the way we think about planning in India. So Indian cities have had a very regulatory, land use based approach to planning. So we got this opportunity to redefine the way we think about planning and to reinvent Delhi into a city that would not only be great for its residents, but also be a sort of a lighthouse city for other cities in India to emulate in terms of planning practices. There have been 3 plans before the Master Plan 2041, and they have mostly been based on what I said, the monofunctional land use planning that has been the trend in India and also was in other countries across the world. However, they have evolved into a more strategic planning approach, and that is what we tried to do with Delhi. So while while there were many things that there were many ideas, there were 4 things we were especially clear on: that the plan has to change 4 of its characteristics. It cannot be norm-based or exclusive or regulatory or static. What did we want it to become? We wanted it to become evidence-based, that is based on ground realities, inclusive, thinking of everybody in the city, outcome-oriented, not thinking of, not counting what has been made, how many projects are done, but what have those projects given the city, and dynamic, that, it's not a plan written in stone. It can change, there can be course correction, there can be a U-turn in case, aspirations change or needs of the people change. So just to detail this out a little bit, what is required is for any city to take decisions or to plan for the future is strong databases. So a strong database can inform governance. A strong database can inform what kind of projects should happen in a city and what should be the priorities for the city. Similarly, what are the ground realities? Right now, when you look at the map of a city, you can see a plethora of colors that represent different land uses, like commercial or residential, or so on and forth. However, instead of that, we said, which location in city needs what? Isn't that what we should look at, rather than going for monofunctional one-color land use? We also wanted to include people in the plan making process, as well as create strategies or frameworks where the people can be involved throughout plan implementation also. So that is something that we did in a big way. Equity was one thing that we said should be the underlying principle in the plan. Plan should also be outcome oriented, is what we established at the very beginning. That is, I'll take this example we give everywhere, is that you should not be counting the number of STPs, which is treatment plants. We should be seeing whether all wastewater has been treated in the city or not, or whether the river has become cleaner or not. So those are the outcomes that we are working towards, not at how much land has been used and how many STPs were built over the plan period. And dynamic, as I said before, that the plan should be allowed to change as per changing contexts. So very quickly, I'll take you through the base work that we did was, for the first time in the history of master planning, we created a baseline for the plan. Where are we now and where do we want to go? So, and how will we get there is exactly what we tried to do. So, and a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis for Delhi. We got inputs from experts across the world, and especially those experts who had already worked in Delhi, various sectoral experts, because we wanted to build on the work that was already done instead of starting from scratch. We wanted to be a little smart about it. And citizen engagement was a major, I would say, a major input came from citizens, civil society organizations for the plan, and from academia, from other government agencies in Delhi. So these were the major topics or priority areas that came up while we were taking these inputs. And from these priority areas emerged the vision, the policies of the plan, and how will the plan now go about implementing these policies. And that is what makes up the master plan. This is just a picture showing the baseline studies that we did. And a very important thing over here to mention is that all of the agencies, almost all of the government agencies and service providing agencies in Delhi got involved in the making of this plan. I would also like to say a little bit about citizen engagement. Not only did we do this plan during the COVID pandemic, but despite that, we were able to get people to participate in online engagement meetings. A visioning exercise was carried out, and about 5,000 visions were sent by different people. CSOs really participated with a lot of enthusiasm. Approximately 400 experts were consulted. And I have to tell you, as ma'am mentioned before, the master plan is in the public domain on the DDA website. And we have received more than 30,000 suggestions from the public and government agencies, which are now being incorporated in the revision of the plan. So just to go back to the process, from all of these priority areas emerged the vision and these goals. The vision for Delhi 2041 is foster a sustainable, livable and vibrant Delhi. Now, while it would seem like a general vision for any city, this is what every city should aspire for. And while you can read the three goals, an underlying or an overarching, whatever you would like to use, is that the plan has to work towards creating an inclusive city, which is for all, irrespective of age, gender, ability, background, all people. The plan has to be responsive towards all people, is one thing that was very important. So as I've already said before, from the vision, there were these three goals, and from the three goals emerged the 6 priority policies of the plan, which we like to call a 6-point transformative agenda for Delhi. It is prioritizing environmental sustainability, facilitating economic development, enhancing heritage, culture, and public life, improving housing and social infrastructure, moving towards low carbon mobility, and developing resilient physical infrastructure. Now, as a lot of previous speakers spoke about, IT, digital technologies, and all of this, in the physical infrastructure section of the plan, for the first time in the Delhi Master Plan, we have a chapter on digital infrastructure, given that it is so important for any city of the size of Delhi, or even small cities, I would say, but especially for Delhi, it is extremely important. So just very quickly, because after this, Nilesh will take over, the 6 major policy areas that you see on the top left-hand side, how will these, so these are big ideas, that these are the areas that are priorities, but how will these changes or these transformations be visible to people? How will they manifest on ground? For that, on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see are two strategies, which we call the spatial strategies, for urban regeneration, which is for the built up part of Delhi, and the new development areas, which is the greenfield development on the periphery of Delhi largely. So combining these two is what makes up the master plan. And on the right side, you see the contents of the master plan. So Nilesh, will you take over from this slide onwards?
Thank you so much, Kanak. I'm audible? Yeah, okay. So just to take off from what Kanak was saying, largely what we did to begin with when we were rethinking the master plan was to structure the document very differently. So typically what happens with master plans is you have a chapter on environment, you have a chapter on housing, you have a chapter on various subjects. What this master plan does, which is relatively different from master plans that have preceded it, is that we separated out what we called the policies towards environment, towards shelter, from the brass tacks, which is essentially how much FAR am I going to get on ground, what are the development controls that will apply to me when I'm actually building on ground, etc. So the line between what was policy for Delhi as an outlook over 20 years was really separated out in the document from the brass tacks or the real development controls, etc. And it kind of makes the document extremely readable. What I'm going to try and take you all through, and what is essential to understand is that all of the policies, so for example, if the environment policies has laid down 5 big agenda points for itself, all of those find manifestation in each and every spatial development policy that is developed for the city. So how does one go about doing this? For example, Kanak spoke about the fact that typically master plans tend to be land use plans, and that's a typical land use plan, which means that every plot of land in the city is marked a particular color. What we said is a yellow marked plot in the center of the city cannot be treated in the same way as a yellow marked plot, say, in the periphery of the city, or in an area that is environmentally sensitive, or in an area that has enormous economic potential. So, can we therefore start working with overlays over this land use map? So the big question that we are always asked is, master plan एक तरीके से बनता है. How does one begin to deconstruct a master plan within the statutory domain and start making it strategic? And our first answer is, I think you have to start moving beyond that colored map and start seeing a place for its potential or the outcomes that you want to desire out of it. So for example, as soon as I start overlaying small characteristics onto that same plan, I start seeing that there are areas which have the potential to become Delhi's green buffers. So therefore, a more green, low FAR kind of development must be prescribed there. You would have areas in the city which have extremely high transit focus, mass transport availability. Could we then look at them as high intensity mixed use hubs? You have areas which are dilapidated and old. Delhi is hundreds of years old, and parts of Delhi are perhaps even more than a century old. So how does one undertake active regeneration of the area while simultaneously building what you see the whites in the plan are areas that remain blank and are susceptible to illegal development over time. So how does one undertake planned development in areas like this? So what we started doing is we started overlaying character zones, so to say, over the classic land use map to give us broadly 4 large buckets of policies that really define the master plan. So on the greenfield side, you have land pooling as a large mechanism that really decides how development will come up in the greenfield areas. And you also have what I was showing you, the buffer areas, which will be relatively low intensity developments. And the brownfield part, which is the existing parts of Delhi, where one would have to both look at extremely intense mixed use developments in the form of TOD, as well as urban regeneration projects, where you're really renewing the existing fabric. It also enabled us, such an overlay also enabled us to say that, again to give you an example, residential FAR in the city on a plot is 200 as an example. But should it be 200 everywhere? Perhaps not. One will have to look at whether the intensity of FAR and the kind of development one wants in the city needs to vary due to particular circumstances. So for example, developments that are closer to mass transit, which have easy mass transit access, it is way more sustainable to have much more density and mixed use closer to those areas than in the periphery. So how does one begin to do that? So we, through our policies, were able to construct a larger FAR regime, a kind of a city level logic for how FAR is to be distributed. one of the aims that the plan also tried to take up was, let's not create wholesale policy environments, but let's look at a more strategic kind of viewfinder. So for example, when the TOD policy existed and when we started kind of dismantling the TOD policy itself, we realized almost 40% of what gets captured under the TOD policy, which means very, very high FAR, mixed use, etc. Many of those areas don't actually have very high public transport access. Just to indicate one, I have circled that area. So what has been marked as 500 meters on either side of the entire network was considered TOD. We moved that to saying, let's look at a more strategic approach where we are identifying nodes that can take this kind of high development and where the surrounding area, the entire influence area, can be planned if we need to create a kind of a development that is able to give you multimodal interfaces, it's able to give you, intense high mixed use development, but which is supported by area level planning and therefore can take up the kind of traffic and other service issues that might happen. And of course, which can start giving back public spaces to the city, because many of the TOD developments will actually occur in dense areas of the city. We also started linking things like FAR to outcomes. Just to give you an illustrative example, in Delhi, the regeneration policy, regeneration meaning I have an existing plot which is developed and I intend to reconstruct it. If you see the kind of graph there is, if I'm taking up a normal regeneration policy where not much is being offered back to the city, I get, say, about 1.35 times the present FAR as an incentive FAR for undertaking regeneration. As soon as I achieve the highest green rating on the building, which means that my building will be greener, it will have lesser emissions and so on and so forth, and if I'm able to amalgamate a few areas and come up with better planned neighborhoods and also give back more public space to the city, my eligible FAR jumps up to 1.5 times. Whereas if I also happen to be in an area which the government thinks is a business promotion area, I need to promote businesses in these areas, it jumps up even further to 1.7x. And finally, by the time it reaches what we understand as the most strategic nodes in the city, which are the transit-oriented development nodes, it goes up to as high as sometimes 1.8 or 1.9x. So the idea was to step up or link FAR eligibility of plots to, can they give something back to the city when they are regenerating? So that kind of a linkage was established. Just to again give you an example, when we say typically cities across the world have found it very difficult to maintain green belts. We realize that just by saying कि आपको यहाँ पे खेती करनी है या agriculture करना है, it's really not going to solve anything. So can one start giving them options where construction is not necessarily the only way in which you can exact revenues from land? For example, something like an Apple campus or a Google campus or agricultural universities, these don't require very high FAR, but they can be amply revenue generating. So what we tried to do is that we've given them a graded option of development, which allows them to retain large tracts of land as wooded areas and greens, but also allows them some remunerative component to work with. We also, as part of this plan, there was a lot of kind of dismantling that was done as part of the plan. So for example, FAR is typically linked to a plot. Every plot has a particular FAR. When it came to land pooling, we said, why link it that way? It's possible the FAR of two plots is combined onto one plot and the other plot just becomes green. One can have much more greener development, one can free up land. So that delinking of FAR and moving it to a kind of a build space logic from a land logic is something that the plan attempted. Also brought in several new innovations. For example, we've always had flat parking norms. Every residential building has to provide the following number of cars per house, etc. We started bringing in a more dynamic approach where we developed a heat map for the entire city for the public transport accessibility levels. So that map, for example, tells you exactly which parts of Delhi have very, very, very high public transport access. And if the public transport access is indeed so high, then you cannot also be supporting very high private parking. So, that entire logic of how the map deals with parking, etc., that comes into play. At the building level itself, we also brought in new ideas like a green-blue factor, where every building will be approved only if it meets a certain, not just the green rating, but a greening criteria of, green roofs, maintaining certain parts as pervious, so on and so forth. So that was brought in. Kanak mentioned a very, very important facet of this plan is that unlike previous plans, it's not output based, it's outcome based. So no more are we going to measure हमने इतने रास्ते बनाए या इतने STPs create किए, इतने अस्पताल बनाए. We are actually more interested in seeing, has the Yamuna got depolluted? Has the per capita or the beds per thousand ratio improved over time? So we are looking at bigger KPIs, and the road towards achieving those KPIs can be very, very dynamic. So we left it at that. Just a last slide, long-term citizen facilitation. I think that was a part of our brief of how do you actually get this to implementation. So one of the things that the master plan has simultaneously started doing is really engaged with citizens on the one hand, but also created a long-term approach for this engagement. So a citizen portal, it's already active, but we are of course working on it with guidance documents. For example, if I'm saying अपने घरों में roof garden बना दीजिए. Now roof garden is not an easy thing to actually make. It's not about planting pots. So how does one go about it? Are there easier methods of doing it? And it's possible that this kind of technical handholding can happen from the government agencies themselves. Second, there'll be a GIS-based portal which will allow people to access a lot of information spatially. Third, simultaneously, so typically policies get made but regulations get delayed. So all of that work has happened simultaneously. A data sharing protocol for the multiple agencies that Kanak spoke about will come into play, which will force everybody to share data in particular metric forms every year so that analysis can be done. KPI-based monitoring I've already spoken of. And importantly, the plan also has a buy-in from multiple agencies through service plans. And DDA itself, the main agency who's dealing with this, is beginning to work around internal capacity creation through single window portals, improving business processes, creating dedicated monitoring cells for the various policies and so on. So, there is a kind of a larger plan support framework that the DDA is also setting in place. I'll close at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kanak, and thank you to Nilesh for introducing us to the Delhi Master Plan. I think any questions if anyone has, any clarification someone is seeking? Okay, so I think all clear to everyone. Anyways, it is there in the public domain. You can give it. Okay, this one, this someone. Okay. So thank you to both of you, and we would like to request you to please accept this small token of our gratitude and appreciation as we present this memento from Exhibitions India Group. So it's very interesting to see, as you said, this is an outcome-based plan. And second is that, as I say, same size doesn't fit all. So it is area-wise, you're looking into what the needs and the requirements of that particular area is, and accordingly, the plan is developed.